Deep Dive Film School makes no claim of ownership of the film footage used in this episode. The film footage is owned entirely by the copyright holders. Deep Dive Film School uses the footage only for purposes of education, commentary, and criticism under fair use. Also, we're going to spoil the hell out of this movie, so this is your warning. Welcome to Deep Dive Film School.
This week we are going to begin our Surreal Comedies Festival with 2001's Wet Hot American Sherlock.
Whoa, let's dive into me. All right, guys, I'm Adam Sherlock.
And I'm Adam Palcher. Please remember to like and subscribe. And I will we'll say this again. If you're listening on the podcast, thank you. Please keep listening on the podcast. But the YouTube channel, you get a whole new experience watching us and all the elements of visual things and jokes that we can throw in there. And we work really hard to get all that stuff done.
There's a lot of stuff. That I think
so
I'm like.
Subscribe to that as well.
If you just heard the audio. Mm-hmm. Like, there's some good
You're missing some good jokes.
Definitely.
But nevertheless, the conversation is the same. So thank you for watching.
Yes.
Please subscribe. This week we begin our Surreal Comedies Festival. We're going to go through a variety of different weird off-the-wall type of movies.
Yeah.
Wet Hot American Summer. We're going to start with Kung Fu Hustle. We're going to talk about next week. And then we are going to do Brain Candy
from Kids in the Hall. And then Life of Brian, the Monty Python film. And I think that the thing that we really realized when we were like, okay, well, what would be good to do? It really started with a conversation we had at a party about Brain Candy.
Yes.
And just like what a weird movie it is. Like just all the weird non sequiturs that come about in it and just all the like really... Again, very surreal sorts of comedy. And because if you really delineate between the idea of like a romantic comedy or even like a buddy comedy, so whether you're talking about like a Superbad style film or even something older like When Harry Met Sally, you're like, oh, it's really dialogue based and it's about quips and it's about fun little twists of fate and things that happen. But I think that these four movies in particular really embody this weirdness where a lot of the humor is either anachronistic, where things are taking place. You know, another one, even though he's not on the list, I would think of would be something like Mel Brooks makes a lot of really surreal comedies where even though we're in Frankenstein's castle,
you could do Airplane here probably.
Exactly. Like you might be in Frankenstein's castle, but then suddenly something that feels like it's from the 1970s happens, right? Mm-hmm. And so like those sort of shifts that do feel really strange. Starting here with Wet Hot American Summer.
Let's do it. David Wain directed Role Models after this, Wanderlust. He was part of The State, of course, helping create that, and Children's Hospital, a few other things like that. Mm-hmm. You know, he wrote this with Michael Showalter, who's also done a ton of stuff, like The Big Sick, a variety of different things.
Stella.
Over the years, Stella. This is kind of a weird combination with the cast here, because you have almost everyone from The State. I think for the most part,
at
least the majority.
Yep.
And then you have a few early SNLers in here, and then you get some random performances by David Hyde Pierce and Janine Garofalo.
Who I think David Hyde Pierce should. David Hyde Pierce should, and Christopher Maloney, both of them should always look like this. In anything they ever do, I want them to just look like this.
Christopher Maloney was born to play this character.
Oh my God.
And now this movie, I mean, it's just kind of weird, but I kept thinking about, trying to think, how can we, because, you know, comedies are kind of hard to review sometimes.
Without just like going down the rabbit hole
this is funny. Remember this part?
Yep.
Like, and I was trying to think what really makes this movie special. What is it that makes it resonate for me personally? I think one, it is the sense of humor is very down my alley. The randomness.
Yes.
I think one is I saw this movie at Sundance in 2001.
I remember you coming back and like telling our group of friends like you'd seen God. You were like, you have no idea what I've seen.
Well, and it was just a cool experience because everyone on the cast was pretty much there.
Right.
This was David Wain's first movie. There was a lot of shit that went into this movie, a lot of heartache. a lot of rainy days, and a lot of different things. But it was just a cool vibe. Everyone was super excited, and you got this massive cast of characters. And a lot of them before their prime, right?
Bradley Cooper's first film.
Yeah, Bradley Cooper's first film, but a lot of them before their prime, and they're all just excited to be there, right?
Yeah.
And they're just having fun. And I'm sure some of the state guys had that, collectively between them, but then you're sharing that with this bigger group. But I think what ultimately this movie comes down to is that you cast it amazing.
Yes.
And everyone is bought in.
Yes,
right?
that's a huge part.
They get what they're trying to do. They get the sense of humor. They get the randomness. Because all of these movies that we're going to review in this festival are exaggerated.
Yep.
Everything's exaggerated and ridiculous, but that's part of what makes surreal comedy, I guess.
Well, I completely agree, and I think that idea of buying in, especially with something like this movie, is really interesting because what you have is, and I think with the David Wain aspects, you get a lot more of the surreal and strange, and I think with the Michael Showalter stuff, you get a lot more of this, and I'm trying to find a way to put my finger on exactly how to phrase this, but it's almost like this old school Woody Allen style of humor where it's like referencing weird things, like the kids want to watch the China Syndrome again. And it's like I went down a rabbit hole of like, what is that and why is that funny? And the China Syndrome was like a movie, I think Michael Douglas was in it, and it was about like a nuclear meltdown, right? Mm-hmm. And I was also like, okay, so it takes place in 1981, so are they watching it on like a reel-to-reel projector in the camp? They'd have to be, or like maybe at best Betamax, right? So like a bunch of campers.
No, they actually do say, hey, let's start up the Betamax.
Oh, they do, that's right. So it's like, okay, so you go, all right, so that's really funny to these guys, is just that line of dialogue of a bunch of 11-year-olds want to watch the China Syndrome again on the Betamax in 1981, and you go, that's so niche, right? That's so weirdly niche. We see a lot of this come up at the end with the Alan Shepard, the stand-up comedian at the end, the old Jewish guy that they all think is hilarious, but he totally isn't. The addition of things like Godspell, there's all this stuff that feels... That's very much, and I'd say that's more in line with something like Stella, where it feels very much like, oh, let's do this campy kind of like old vaudeville Broadway, pastiche kind of a thing. And then David Wain stuff is, we're also going to have a talking can of vegetables, right? And you go, how do you get a crew of people this big to buy into those two weird comedic ideas together?
I wonder if this movie will be appealing to another generation, because for me personally, this is kind of a timeless movie. I can watch this at any time and I'm laughing my ass off, but I also get the references like you're talking about there. I wonder how that will age.
I don't know. I think what's interesting is the other thing this movie has going for it is that along with all this stuff that you totally don't take seriously in any way, there is this little through line, this little thread of the nerdy campers that's actually a really sweet little storyline that fits more in line with something like Superbad.
It's
where
the
you're
one
like,
click that they stick with the kids anyways.
And that those kids never pivot away from their character types, right? Like everyone else here, it's like Paul Rudd's character is really funny.
Are hygienic products, so I take that as a compliment.
And then he goes skeet like that with his glasses.
Hello, ladies.
Hello, ladies. But I would say that like a character like Paul Rudd's character of Andy here, for the most part, plays it pretty straight as this one type of character, but then he totally also pulls faces and has these crazy, silly reactions that go completely against character type. And that's one of the things I think that makes this movie really fun and unique, is that there are these moments where you're like, okay, everybody's going to act this one way. They're all going to go shoot heroin, right? And it's like, so and then we pivot back to the way that their characters would act normally.
Even if it's just for an hour.
Even if it's just for an hour.
Let me go through this. I don't know if you have this note on here, but according to co-writer and director David Wain and Michael Showalter, rejected movie titles for this movie.
Oh, no.
Have you seen this?
No, let's go.
Oh, get ready.
We'll put them up on the screen.
American Love Bunk. American Name Tags and Underwear. American Wedgie. Ankle Bites the Movie. Associate Professor Newman Goes to Camp. Big American Love Wedgie. Blue Balls. Boner Camp. Boners and Clits. Boy Side and Girl Side. Bring a Change of Underwear. Buddy Check. Bug Juice 81.
Oh my God.
Bunk Bed America. Bunk You. Butt Camp. cabin pressure, campfire, camp home sucks, camp masturbate each other.
Oh my God.
Counselors and cancers, damp vagina camp.
Oh my God.
Doo-doo, fresh grass, general swim, going to third, hot American wedgie, hot kids in shorts, hot wedgie days, internment camp,
Oh, Jesus.
the main squeeze, morning wood, postcards from the cot, sex files and videotape of kid masturbating.
Oh my God, what is happening?
Slow dance boner, s'more, don't stop, suck my big hard camp, taco meat drips on nipples too.
What?
Taco meat drips on nipples too. Teenage sex fields, tits and taco day, waterfront blues, welcome back cot, and wet hot beds.
Holy
All rejected
crap.
titles.
Suck My Big Hard Camp is really funny. That one's really, really funny.
I think they went with the safe one and Wet Hot American Summer, which seems very timid to a lot of these now, right?
Yeah. It seems super safe.
Though I'm fully
compared.
invested in Boner Camp.
I mean, that is insane. That is insane. You know, and they're actually one of the names in there brings me to a point, which is, you know, it says like the secret tape of the kid masturbating or whatever. There's weird plot points in this movie that I feel like they just ran out of money. There's like discussion, like there's setups for jokes.
Yeah.
And there's
the Paul
never
Rudd, murdering children, leaving them to drown is one of them, I think.
where it just like it never resolves itself.
I don't think they had much money. I think they made this movie for like $2 million.
Right.
And it was shot in, I believe, Pennsylvania, and it rained 23 out of the 28 days.
Oh my God.
So it was like a tough shoot for everyone involved.
Right.
There's scenes where you can see like people's breath.
And they're
it's
in like shorts and like t-shirts. God.
Yeah, and the poor girls that are like, because this is like kind of a Meatballs ripoff, so there's girls in bikinis everywhere.
Well, and the Meatballs thing is really interesting because I was like going, okay, what are some summer camp movies? Like, it's such a ubiquitous concept for like, especially an 80s style thing. But I was like, okay, so there's like Meatballs, Porky's.
Porky's. Yeah, definitely.
But then I don't know if it's just like, did it become a cliche just as a cliche, and there weren't a lot of other 80s like summer camp movies? Like, you know what I mean? Because it feels like such a cliche tacked on thing. But I'm like, was it in TV shows a lot? Like, I can't really pinpoint where this became such like like an 80s summer camp movie. And I looked up online and I was like, there's like 2 of them. You know what I mean? That was kind of a weird phenomenon.
A lot, but I think the ones that are there are pretty famous. You could probably put Endless Summer in there.
Oh, that's fair.
With John Cusack. But
and even in the 90s was something like Heavyweights.
Ernest Goes to Camp. Not as highly sexual, but still really good camp movie.
That's what I want to. I want to read. I want to read the 40 not used names for Ernest Goes to Camp. Suck my big hard Ernest.
Oh man, I hope you currently are putting up a picture of that.
Suck my big hard Ernest.
The videotape. One of my favorite things I found out about this is that Camp Tawanda, where they shoot it, they told the people that owned it that it was going to be a family comedy.
Oh,
and
boy.
Then they saw, what does it say? Then they saw the cut of the movie and they were mortified.
I mean, yeah, do your research first. If you spent like 30 seconds, I mean, this is pre-Google 2001, but if you spent 30 seconds doing any research into the guys from the state, you'd be like, oh, this probably isn't going to be that. Mm-hmm. So I've been thinking a lot about some of the aspects of this movie that I really enjoyed the most. I think that, there are these like very classic tropes of characters trying to get laid, right? Which is, again, a very 80s kind of comedy thing.
Yeah.
I think that Victor in particular trying to get back from being with the campers to have sex with Abby is one of the funniest through lines that,
no doubt. That
so many
happened
jokes.
To David Wain.
That's right. I did read this that
and
he
also
actually
did crash his van.
Yeah, he did crash his van.
Might be the best part of the movie.
It is the best part of the movie.
Anytime I hear that Loggins and Messina song, that's all I can think about.
No, we ain't got money. I'm so in love with honey and everything. Bring a chain of love, yeah. In the morning when I rise, bring it. Oh, shit!
And then they crash the sweetest 80s van for that joke.
It
Like
is
they
good,
totally just like cave in the front of it for the best joke there. But then there's this weird subtext of the gum. Like do you have any gum on you? Like
Yeah, it's like an indication of like, hey, we're
about to make out.
Yeah.
But it's like I'm just wondering, like, where did those little bits and pieces come from, right? Like how much
from
of
Porky's
this?
and meatballs.
Well, the gum thing, like I'm wondering, is that somebody like David Wain or whoever being
I'm
like,
sure.
oh, this is what you did
Yeah.
in your childhood, like when you were at camp. It's just such a weird, like the elements like that. The beekeeper DJ guy
Yeah.
that's not plugged in, that's doing, and that's
he's so necessary for the movie though, which is kind of funny.
yeah, you need this character that's kind of like setting everything up as you go through it. Although apparently none of the other campers can hear him.
Yeah, he's not plugged in.
Yeah, that's like a that, and see again, that goes back to this sort of surreal kind of creepy aspect to some of the jokes where you're like, okay, that's really weird. I don't understand like the point of. I mean, I understand the point of it in that it's funny, but it also like breaks the reality of the movie itself.
I also
right?
think you need to make me believe something is real long enough for it to be funny, to have this kind of sense of humor. Does that make sense?
Like, what do you mean?
Like, you have to make me believe what they're trying to do. Like, he's actually talking to a talking can
Yes.
of vegetables, right?
Yeah.
To make it funny.
Yeah.
And like I said before, this is so my sense of humor. And for me, if you're going with this type of sense of humor, go for it. Like, get weird, do shit, like get wacky about it, and they totally do.
So it's almost like
They
like
hang on those childhood tropes of summer camp and wanting, being nervous kid and wanting to kiss someone, but you don't know really why. But they also show the horrors of camp, and they just exaggerate certain parts to make them funnier, and it's not what you would normally exaggerate either, right? It's something
Right.
way off the wall.
Well, it's almost like having a character like Coop be
So good.
be like so twee in these moments, right? Where he's just like oh, I don't know, like I'm a total slut, like that
love
kind of
sluts.
I love sluts, and you're like it's so twee, it's so like, oh, just the good guy. But then the fact that at the end of it, her response is, I'm young, I just want to have a lot of sex.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, I get that. It's like those twists in there make that really work, because it is kind of pushing up against the cliched idea of who these characters are. And it sounds like what you're saying also is that to own the absurdity to the 10th degree is it's like that commitment is almost funny, right? Like the commitment to actually seeing Gene hump the fridge is and the other character whose name I always forget, but he's done some of my
Gary.
favorite. Well, no, I mean not his character, the actor.
Oh, okay.
But he's done some of my favorite Tim and Eric sketches.
It's okay. That's my older brother David calling in. Yeah, having some fun. I appreciate it. It's good.
You're gonna get a real job.
All right, David, I do have a real job. This is my real job, all right?
But he's just fantastic. Who's the other chef there?
Oh,
and
yeah, I think it's AD.
yeah, I can't think of his name, but when he kind of shows up in the background and pushes the fridge towards him,
Yeah.
right? It's like, and it's like they're selling this completely ridiculously like red in the face embarrassment stupid concept, and they're playing that whole thing all the way out, and it's almost like that commitment allows you to enjoy it on a whole new level, right?
Absolutely. That's kind of what I mean for all of these movies, kind of focusing on why these movies work for us, or me personally, and why they're funny. I mean, this is essentially a kind of a ridiculous Dazed and Confused, right? And
Yeah. Whereas with Dazed and Confused, it really played all of those stereotypes and really well-worn territory of a kind of coming of age story.
but also it's all encapsulated in like, this is supposed to be one day. And
It's one
all
day.
this shit happens.
Yeah. Well, and then
People get pregnant and fall in love.
oh my God, again hopping around, but I think
Yeah.
David Hyde Pierce coming back with the Hopkins Award, and it's like a bowling trophy. It's
Yeah,
like an
I
actual
noticed.
award.
Yeah.
Like that made me laugh so hard, because
Yeah.
I was like, why not? Why not? You're like, oh yeah, it would be really funny if the next day he got like overnight he got the Hopkins Award. He's been
and I
going to get
guarantee
for.
80% of the people watching are like, oh yeah, he got the award.
Yeah, he got the award, and you're like, yeah, it's a bowling trophy basically. Like it's amazing.
I totally noticed that.
Yeah,
I bought it at a thrift store.
It totally is. Yeah, that kind of stuff is so funny to me. But I think that it's also like those well-worn territories in this movie are just set dressing to hang all the weirdness onto it, right? Sure. Like there's nothing in here that's ever actually at stake. Including the arcs of any of the characters, and that's part of like once you accept that. And I was like thinking,
maybe Molly Shannon, she's probably gonna get arrested, but outside of her,
that is the word. And apparently, in the original script, they were supposed to have like a full-on like kiss.
Yeah.
And then like when they said like when the child actor showed up like with his parents, they immediately were like, yeah, we can't do that. There's no way we're gonna get away with that.
I'm sorry, but there is something special about Molly Shannon.
I agree.
Like she's such a comedic genius.
Well, she has this
something that
nervous energy or something
well, definitely in this movie she has that, but she just has this sweetness that you just automatically love.
Yeah, I think it's because we all grew up knowing some lady that looked like her. You know what I mean? But when she's like, what I need you to do here is to be helpful. I don't need you to contradict me, okay?
Well, she's
there's literally tons of markers though, and there's only one gray.
that's so
it's like you could cut the tension with a knife.
Here's the one.
Yeah, exactly.
Share that one black.
She's like, I don't know what I'm doing. But I think and then
she's definitely unstable.
And it's what's his name that shows up as her husband?
Judah Friedlander.
Judah Friedlander shows up. That is one of
Ron?
Ronald von Kleinenstein. See, there's another one of these like weird kind of vaudevillian style jokes is all of the Jewish names.
Oh yeah.
The fact that it's the Jewish camp, but it's like just these like the long, like it felt like a Coen Brothers bit,
absolutely,
right?
But like think of when Janine Garofalo is listing all the campers that need to get their lunch ready for the early bus.
Yes,
well, first off, what the fuck does that mean?
Yeah, the early bus. Like they're gonna take the early bus home, and they're just like all of these.
But she's just, you could tell she's just like making up names as she goes.
Yeah, it reminded me so much of.
But it's like they go there and they leave it on that joke. It's like the chicken fighting in Family Guy, right?
It goes
too long, and then after a point, it's like, oh, okay, that's really funny.
It's funny again. It starts funny, and it gets really annoying.
That's pretty genius.
And she's doing it in the background, and all I could think the whole time was A Serious Man, the Coen Brothers film, where it's just like, you know, it's a downer of a film, but all the stuff in it that's funny is all of these Jewish references that the Coen Brothers love. And that happens again here when Coop's like, I love how sometimes for no reason at all you're late for shul. And it's like, what?
Forever I thought he was just mispronouncing school.
Yeah, no.
In a weird way, but shul is a real thing in the Jewish community. Yeah.
So here's the thing, though, that I realized.
He's on the phone with his parents. He's like, I don't know. I mean, I guess she kind of has a big nose.
Yeah, totally.
First thing they ask. First thing he does too after they kiss.
Yeah,
right?
he calls his parents to let him know.
The one.
Yeah. And you're in the background, and they're like, oh, this isn't going to end well. But what I was going to say is, I think when I was trying to figure out this kind of how we understand from the very beginning that nothing is at stake and that's okay.
Yeah. That buys you in as an audience.
And you know what it is? It took me until watching it. I've seen this movie 100 times, and this time watching it, I was going in wondering, like, what is that thing? And it's this. It's a bunch of 30-something-year-olds pretending to play 16-year-olds. If you start from a place where Cooper is supposed to be 15, I guess, like Coop's supposed to be 15 and he's like obviously in his mid-30s. If you start from there, then everything else is easy because you're like, oh, I get it, right?
I think the genius of parody is seeing something 1,000 times, something that you've seen 1,000 times, and yet you still find some way to make it funny, right?
Yes. That's a really good point. Yes.
And so, I don't know, that's going to be important in all of these movies.
Mm-hmm, definitely. One thing that I didn't know, even after seeing this movie as many times as I did, is I finally, after all this time, was like, who sings that song? Who sings Show Me the Fever?
Show me the fever into the fire, taking it higher and higher.
higher, right?
Oh yeah, I think it was written for the movie, right?
It's written for the movie by a guy who the members of the state worked with. He also created the theme song for the state. And it's Craig Wedren, the lead singer of Shudder to Think.
Oh.
So, you know, he does scores. He did all the kids' songs that they write in School of Rock.
Yeah.
Right? And so, like, he writes not just musical scores for movies, but also original songs for it. But he wrote, and I think the humming song at the end, when all the campers are leaving, and it's the acoustic song, I think that's another one of his. But I was like, oh my God, that's a Craig Wedren song? Because, like, I love Shudder to Think. I don't know if you were ever a big fan, but, like, to find that out, I was like, that's kind of amazing. And then he did a number of other theme songs for all of the Wet Hot American Summer offshoots after that they did. He continued to write different theme songs for the stuff they did later.
Well, to hit on what you were talking about just a minute ago about these 30-year-olds playing, you know, or they're probably in their early 20s, but they're obviously not 14.
No, there's no way.
And then, you know, this movie spawned a sequel and a prequel.
A prequel?
Prequel of them 15 years later, physically, like Michael Showalter's belly is hanging out of his of his tight 80s t-shirt.
And he's supposed to be younger than he is in the first movie.
Or something like that, but something ridiculous. We're getting all their origin stories.
Yeah.
So that's taking it even further. Like the joke just keeps going.
Now I will say,
working for some reason.
Well, and I think part of it also is because the fidelity still exists. Because in the prequel, we see that H. John Benjamin, who plays the can of vegetables, is actually a camp counselor who finds a radioactive puddle of goo in the woods, which is how the China syndrome starts.
I didn't put that together.
So.
Oh, that's good.
So again, it runs deep, man. The references run real deep, right?
Excellent.
I love that. Again, it's so stupid.
Let me ask you this: is Ken Marino the perfect asshole?
He's amazing. He's
never been bad.
I've never seen anyone. You know what he has? He has resting smug face.
Yeah.
He is just like he always looks like he doesn't
John
believe
McKinley,
you.
Like asshole. I mean, maybe not as yelly, but like every time you see him, he's playing that same type of character.
I could see him
loose, but like you know what I'm saying.
I could see him aging into a total John McKinley type.
Yeah.
You know, like he's about there age-wise now to like play just like the smug, shitty boss in anything, right?
Oh, for sure.
It's fantastic.
Got a career of doing that. Plus, he's just got that face and that he's just consistently funny. I love him.
There is video.
I don't know if you've ever seen Party Down. This is a show.
Yes, Party Down is well, and Party Down is another sort of stepchild of the state family.
That's what I'm saying.
Well, and it's really interesting too to look at that because it seems like that the two lanes, if we were looking at sort of like the state family tree. The two biggest ones, one is Wet Hot American Summer and the other one's Reno 911.
Oh, yeah.
Those are the two really big ones. And then you have things like Party Down. You also have...
Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Yep. And then the movie The 10. I think all of them appeared in that film.
Sure, definitely.
We talked about Stella. We talked about Children's Hospital. But it's really cool because, and we'll talk about this a little bit when we talk about... when we review Brain Candy. But it's actually...
You get the sketch comedy group doing something absurd.
Well, going on to do popular things. I think the state is actually really unique in this sense.
It's true.
You go, okay,
a lot of people became huge out of this.
Yeah, and you go, that's not true.
Like Amy Poehler, I didn't even know who she was when I saw this in 2001.
Right.
Same with a lot of these people.
But you take a group like one particular era of Saturday Night Live, and you're like, you might have an Eddie Murphy or a Bill Murray out of those groups, but you're going to have twice as many that don't go on to do much of anything other than maybe some bit parts here and there. Even Kids in the Hall as a comedy troupe, you got one or two people, but most of them don't go on to do anything else. Or if they do, it's not
SNL,
big stuff.
I would say is probably
close.
Their average is higher for sure.
But the state is like, it's insane.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at some of these guys like Ben Garant. These guys are like, he has the life, man. He's a punch-up writer, right? I mean, he gets paid to just like add some extra jokes into this Toy Story movie, like left and right? And you just go, that's really cool.
Gig.
Oh,
Yeah.
it sounds like a really sweet gig. But I think just doing that research again, I was like, oh my God, like there's maybe 2 names out of all these people from the state that I'm like, I don't know who that person is. But the vast majority of them you do. And again, I think it's really cool because, the state was such a great and really funny show and very creative and very weird. But then it was like, we didn't hear anything from him for a minute. And then this movie popped out.
Yeah.
And I think it was after this movie that then we had Reno 911 and things like that. But it was like this space in like the late 90s where it was like, oh yeah, the state, that was a cool show. Like, I wonder what happened to it. And then they pop out with this insane movie.
Some people probably haven't even seen that.
Yeah.
I don't think, it's got a cult following, but it's not that big.
Well, part of the problem
Maybe
was
it's bigger because of all these people becoming successful.
at the time when it was on MTV, they had licensing for tons of music. And so they used it in the sketches. So it would be like a character would come in and it would start playing like Let's Get It On or whatever. Well, they were doing that in all of these sketches because MTV was like, don't worry about it. Well, then when they go to try and release it, they're like, oh, we need musical releases, copyright releases for all of this music. And they were like, we'll never recoup our losses of what it'll cost to license all of this music that's stuck in it.
I didn't know that.
So that's the reason why it's kind of just like fallen off and doesn't really exist anymore, which is a total bummer because I think things like Doug, the Doug character whose dad is like an awesome like record executive.
One of my favorite.
And Doug is like trying to rebel against and he's like, don't smoke that in this house. He's like, oh, you don't like my weed, Dad? He's like, no, it's really bad pot. Like, I've got some good stuff in my room if you want some of that.
And one of my favorites, this is a side shoot, but is when he finds condoms in Doug's side chair. He's like, they're Profos, Dad. I put them on my dick when I want to have sex. Profos. I put them on my dick.
Like, yeah, okay, great. Yeah, sounds good.
It's $240 worth of pudding.
That's right. Yes, you're going to
dip.
dip your balls in it. So I don't know, like, at what point is there any point in even talking about the plot of this movie?
I mean, there's not really a plot. I mean, I guess you're just following characters, really. These people are.
It's a day in the life.
A day in the life of these counselors mostly.
Yeah.
Right. You get some of the kids, and then you get David Hyde Pierce and that offshoot and that clique of the kids. But like, but it's mostly about the counselors. Michael Ian Black and Bradley Cooper getting married is kind of an offshoot, and those guys like, why is he going? Like, they're watching the girls take off their clothes.
Yeah.
They just obviously don't get what's going on, and they build that joke up into
they bring
this is for you, and all that stuff. And then you have the Paul Rudd character that's just all over the place, emotionally, because he's like makes out with Katie, and he's like, "Oh, you're suffocating me, Katie." And it's like,
whatever, dyke. Yeah,
it's just like what? And then his like, I think I've always said that. Paul Rudd is this generation's Bill Murray. I think he has a lot of the same qualities and can just be himself and consistently be charming and funny, right?
Yeah,
like
that's a good comparison.
Murray.
I could see that.
Obviously Bill Murray is a very high bar, personally, I think, but I think he has a lot of the same comedic tendencies, a lot of the same dry sense of humor. And I don't know, I remember seeing him and not knowing who that was either. He was just the hot guy in this movie.
I was like, oh, it's the guy from, he was in Clueless, I think is the only thing that I remembered him from.
But when he hits his lunch off and just walks away like this careless man-child. Yeah. And he has to pick up all of his silverware and the food and everything. Oh my God.
It's so amazing.
It's amazing. I don't know if there's a point in talking about this. We keep talking about the characters because it really is more about the characters, but it's just kind of your basic antics that they get into, right?
Right. Well, and again, playing
outside of the hour in the city.
Well, and the hour in the city, and then I would say the second one is the training montage.
Oh yeah.
The to learn the way. It's about the girl, but it's not about the girl. Yeah. It's both, right? And this very like
after Gene finds himself.
Yeah, and it's this real like training montage a la Karate Kid kind of,
Well, they pause the punching in the air is Rocky.
Is Rocky. It's totally Rocky, but
Yeah.
but you can't tell any of the things that they're actually doing. It's like just like these random like dance steps and like
I mean,
and he's
none
and
of
he,
it
and he
makes
can't
sense.
get it. Like he
They're
pounds.
racing.
Well, no, it's when he's trying to do like
the
whatever
dance
dance,
studio?
yeah, in the dance studio, and he runs up and he does like the soft pound on the wall.
Yeah.
Is like the most fantastic because you're watching it, and I feel like it's almost like there's two levels, and level one is that it's funny in the way that like accidentally turning on a TV in a hotel room in a different country and there's this thing on and you're like, what am I seeing? You know, it's like when these videos go viral on YouTube that are like, it's a line dance of Indian people that are in like space clothes out in a field somewhere. And you're like, this is amazing because I don't know what's happening, right? Mm-hmm. And then if you were to find out the level underneath that is, yeah, they purposely tried to confuse you by doing something
No doubt.
bizarre. It's like, that's sort of what you're seeing, right? And
Yeah.
I love that because, and again, like this is something that you see a lot with a group like Monty Python. I'm thinking of some of the sketches they've done in Meaning of Life or some of these other ones where like you suddenly cut to like the most bizarre thing that if it was tweaked just slightly would actually be nightmarish and kind of scary, but instead it's just funny because you're like, I don't know what this is supposed to make me feel. You know?
It's true. You have to be bought in as well, right?
Yes, you do. Yeah, because I do think that there are people that
I'm sure this is not for everyone.
no, it's not. It's not. And I think I think that people who do enjoy maybe something that's more cerebral or more dialogue heavy, like that's what they're going to enjoy. Whereas it's not slapstick, but it's much closer to slapstick comedy than it is really cerebral dialogue heavy comedy, right?
Yeah, we could go through and list scenes and stuff and keep doing that, like the chase scene with the hay bale and the Camp Tiger Claw softball speech, that kind of stuff. I mean, we could keep going.
Which again subverts your expectations of what the trope is supposed to do,
Exactly.
and that
that's where
does
they
feel
shine.
more dialogue heavy, right?
But, and then they throw in all of these panic things just to have some kind of ending, and it's definitely mashed together. But to me, it makes it better.
The Skylab bit. So like that whole thing actually is another thing that David Wain remembered from his childhood because it was when Skylab actually was breaking apart. I remember, you know, I'm pretty close to his age and I remember that also of like hearing about that all the time where it's like, oh yeah, Skylab's falling apart. Hey everybody, it's Sherlock here on the edit, so it looks like both myself and David Wain were off on our timeline here. Skylab broke apart during a botched re-entry in 1979, 2 years before the events of Wet Hot American Summer, and at least 5 years before my dumbass would have any recollection of those events. I must have been thinking about the Challenger shuttle explosion, or maybe something from the plot of Critters. Anyway. He would talk about like him and his friends would be out on the soccer field, like at camp, and there'd be like a little piece of like foil on the ground. Someone would be like, dude, I think that's from Skylab. And so he was like, what if we had Skylab fall in our movie? And they said it was the most expensive prop they built was that piece of Skylab. And it looks great. This big
does look
smoking
good.
thing like hits the ground. I'll just say,
Love this movie, though.
I've never seen anything like H. John Benjamin's Can of Vegetables. I've never...
Still not.
It's so far out of the realm of possibilities of what you do when you have a budget to make a movie, right? You just
I
go,
think that forces them to be creative, though, right? It's obviously like on a string.
yeah, moving the little lid of the can. Where did it even come from to begin? And I scoured interviews trying to figure out, and like no one gives any reasonable explanation.
There's not one. That's the.
He
beauty
turns
of it.
and he's holding it and he goes, maybe you should talk to him. And I remember the first time watching this, I was like, I don't know what that scene means. I don't know what that means. And then later, when it's talking to, I was like,
I could suck my own dick.
again, even weirder because you're like, you don't have a penis. You're a can of vegetables. Like nothing about it makes any sense.
But
and it is
we find out later he was a real
in his origin story, which is like, why does he need an origin story? But it's those elements that I guess that's part of it. Is it's like funny on the merit of they somehow hit that funny bone and it is legitimately funny, and then a whole subtext layer of the daringness to say, yeah, it's going to be a can of vegetable soup that we have a string to make it do this, and like you said, take it seriously as a heart attack when we do it.
Yeah.
it is interesting. And I mean,
And
maybe
that's hard to accomplish.
well, and I don't know, and please, I if people out there are annoyed to listen to two guys sit and try and dissect why a thing is funny, I get that. But doing it is actually really interesting.
Yeah.
Because it's really easy to be like, this is really funny and I enjoy it. But it's something else entirely to be like, well, why?
This is funny to me, but may not be funny to everyone. How do I do this? Yeah.
And the more surreal you get, I think the more that you have to dissect that to figure out why. Because it's easy to be like, oh, this is wordplay. Or this is irony, and be like, oh, those make sense. But having them get away from camp for an hour and they end up like in a heroin den is fantastic, because you're like, I don't even know how we got there.
Yeah.
Like, it's absurd on the face just for being absurd.
Exactly.
Well, I'll say this to end on kind of a sweet note. Even as all this ridiculous stuff is happening at the very end, I love, again, like I was saying, this one arc of the actual nerdy, the indoor kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all of them are laying there with their heads together, like in the grass. And the one kid says, "It's like the last 24 hours have changed the whole summer for me. We saved everyone's lives, and no one will ever know it." And then the other kid goes, "It's almost better that no one will know it." And I was like, oh, that's actually really sweet. Like,
Yeah.
that is a neat little, like, because you have to have something to tie it together completely. Otherwise, it's like, you can pop up a bunch of middle fingers at the end of the movie to the audience for sticking through the whole thing.
Sure.
But it's nice to also have at least one little piece that kind of ties it together with a little bow at the end.
Sure.
And then flip them off one more time, right?
Yeah.
And I watching it again, I enjoy all those other elements, but seeing how it was crafted together is pretty wild. To not think in the moment like, oh, I don't know why we're doing this, because this is insane, right? Like, this is never going to work. People aren't going to get it.
I mean, it's true. Again, it's hard to do. And these guys obviously have experience doing it with the state and testing themselves and going through the motions of what's silly and what's not, right? I think if they didn't come from the state, we wouldn't have this movie.
Right.
If they didn't have that experience, we wouldn't have this movie, or at least this version of this movie, right? They were testing themselves to see how far they could push it, and that's what you have to do with comedy.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think this will come up a lot in this festival. The one difference between what they did on the state and here that probably was maybe not risky, but maybe gave them some anxiety while doing it, is to have a through storyline. Because it's one thing to be like, these are a bunch of vignettes that are in no way tied together. It's another thing to be like, and then this character does this, and then this character does this. And so we'll have all of our little skits in there,
Yeah.
but the same character, it's based around one storyline. Some of those work better than others. I think this one works pretty well. I think next week's movie with Kung Fu Hustle works really well.
Yeah.
It's much more story
I'm
based.
excited to see that again.
And there's more story arcs too. But
Absolutely.
again, I think for what it is, it totally works.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for listening. Please like and subscribe if you like what you see/hear. Look for us on all the social media stuff and wherever you listen to podcasts.
And tell a friend.
Yeah, please do. Share us out. All right, next week we will get into Kung Fu Hustle.
All
Thanks
right.
for watching.
Thanks, you guys.
Joker is officially the first rated R movie in history to earn over $1 billion globally.
Really?
Given the modest $62 million budget, Joker has become one of the most profitable superhero movies of all time. Can you believe that?
I mean, it's really weird. And I said this before, like, I don't necessarily, like, I haven't seen it. I've seen clips of it and things like that, and I'm like, most of what I'm led to believe is it's like, it's not a superhero movie, and it's like, the reason why it's gotten
That's a valid point.
like the reason why it's done so well is because people wanted to see how this was handled in this way.
Yeah.
But you're like, if it was just like, oh, this guy's interpretation of Taxi Driver style, weird loner
Basically what
movie.
it is, yeah.
Yeah, and then you took the Joker aspect out of it, like, I don't know how much money would it have made then.
That's pretty wild. I think you make a valid point,
Right,
though.
because
it
think
is
about-
not it was not a superhero movie.
What was the
The only
Joaquin?
reason is because it's tied to Batman loosely.
So okay, here we
I
go.
mean, obviously, the Joker's tied to Batman long term for sure, but loosely in the movie.
Well, that's what I'm saying is like, what if instead you took an earlier Joaquin Phoenix movie that You Were Never Really Here, or what was it called? You Were You Were Never Here or whatever.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, that guy who's like the grizzled like weirdo dude who like goes and saves the girl, like he's actually the Green Lantern. You'd be like, well, but you didn't really add in any of the mythology, and you're like, I know, but there's one part where he's wearing a T-shirt and it
Actually-
has the symbol on it. You'd be like,
They tie it into the mythology wonderfully, if you ask me.
Right.
But
there's no other characters. Like,
I
there's
still
no-
wouldn't call it a superhero.
there's no
movie.
Batman there. There's no like the Penguin isn't there. Is Harvey Dent there? Is there any like it's Gotham? I guess
No,
right.
It's his origin story.
Right.
But,
But you see what I'm saying? It's
You
kind
know,
of
I get
like
it.
it's missing those elements. Like I said, if the other one you were just like, no, he's the Green Lantern, you'd be like, there's one part we just slipped it in there. That's all they're gonna start doing, right? It's like the
I hope not, but maybe.
it's like the what's the giant J.J. Abrams monster movie? The
Cloverfield.
Cloverfield.
Yeah.
It's going to be like that. It's just every hard-hitting drama that comes out, DC is going to like just be like, hey, and just like slide a little bit of money under the table
Well-
and be like, all I need you to do in this gripping drama is have one scene where you go into the phone booth and you show the S on your chest, and that's all we need.